Okay, now we're going to talk about tonguing and articulation. We've talked about where the tongue is in a resting position, but we need to talk about how to use the tongue to create articulation. Now remember, things that will help us in various ranges of the horn are in articulating and using the tongue. For the high range, we want to have an arched tongue so that our airstream is much faster, and for the lower range, we want to have our tongue much more lower in the mouth so that when we actually articulate, the front of the tongue is what does most of the work. A very common, popular, universal syllable for tonguing is simply T, because it gives us a real crisp beginning of the note. One very common expression that we hear in the brass world certainly, is the tip of the tongue to the top of the teeth. As students wanting to know, well, where is my tongue supposed to actually impact inside of the mouth? Where does the tongue go when I'm tonguing? The tip of the tongue to the top of the teeth. Well, when I say that phrase, my tongue is actually in several different places, which I don't think is a bad thing, because we actually can use our tongue in a very, very great degree of different ways inside of the mouth. But a really common place to think about is just tongue behind the teeth. And for me personally, I actually tongue a little bit lower. I think back to the spitting of the seed when we first created our embouchure. One thing you want to watch out for in beginning students, very young students, is that they are actually using their tongue and not simply closing the aperture together. So let me give you a demonstration. This is going to be just in the middle range, on a middle C, concert F, on the French horn, open partial of just a straightforward articulation. If I use my lips instead of my tongue and I'm actually articulating p, 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 this is what it will sound like. Now that not only sounds very unclear and mushy, but you can see a whole lot of embouchure movement, and that's because I'm actually using all of the stuff on the outside and not the tongue to create the articulation, and this is a problem in young players that haven't quite figured out that the tongue is what is doing the tonguing and not everything else. As opposed to good articulation, I'm using a T syllable, and the embouchure and everything surrounding the embouchure is steady and held still. Always using good air. Now I will tongue a higher note so that you can see the E syllable and the tongue higher, but still articulating with the front of the tongue. We'll go up just an octave. This is a third space C, concert F still, on B flat horn with a trigger. So I'm in essence going T, 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 to, 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 to. Now we'll try an even lower note. I'll go one octave yet, still lower, so that we can see and hear what the tongue is doing in the low range. I have a more of an all syllable. My airspeed is still strong. It is merely slowing down because the oral cavity has created a bigger space through which to pass. I am not using less air on my inhalation or exhalation. Here's that middle C again. That's the difference between those three octaves. Still a crisp sound because the front of the tongue is still at the front of the embouchure. The oral cavity is what's changing.